This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm Andy Georgeson.
I'm James Campbell.
And I'm Chris Bell.
What's Left America is proudly produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends like the Houston Federation of Teachers. That's Local 2415 AFL-CIO. And our new sponsor, Stoli Vodka, and hopefully someday friends just like you. Today on the show, Chris Bell, we're going to cover some great topics. The Democrats supercharge the people. Move over, men. The women are in the house. The emperor has no clothes. And goodbye, John McCain. And, of course, we'll end the show, as always, with Out of Left Field. Let's jump right into it. The Democrats supercharge the people. Tom Perez, the head of the Democratic Party, teamed up with Senator Bernie Sanders last week to push through a change in the Democratic Party system of selecting the party's presidential nominee by taking the power away from the superdelegates. This is a system where elected officials and party elite get a vote to select the party's nominee for president over and above the people in the nominating process. I've been objecting to this for years. I've talked to party officials at events that I host. I've talked to party officials at events that I've been at and made my objections on television about it because I think it disenfranchises voters and lets the party elite select the nominee, Chris Bell.
Well, clearly, and in the last election when you would...
And you've been a superdelegate.
I did.
You have disenfranchised voters.
And with that and $5, you can get a big cup of coffee at Starbucks.
No, seriously. Now let's set this up a little bit better so that we know what we're talking about. The superdelegate system has been around since at least 1968, after that disastrous convention in Chicago. And the Democrats set this up so that we wouldn't have another convention like that. And what it is elected officials, party elite, get a vote, an uncontrolled vote. In other words, when I go to the polls, you go to the polls, all four of us go to the polls and vote in the nomination of the president. If I voted for Bernie Sanders and I nominate an elector at the convention, and I get one person, I'm voting for one person to go to the convention to vote for Bernie Sanders, and that person has to vote for Bernie Sanders. A superdelegate is not bound to any candidate and can select the candidate they want to vote for. There are so many, 15% of the delegates at the convention are superdelegates, and if they bind together with 15% of the votes, they can generally, if they want to, carry the election.
And the problem was it played out in living color in 2016.
Correct.
Because obviously Bernie Sanders was doing very well, but then when you looked at the delegate count, you would see that Hillary Clinton was always ahead because she had locked up so many superdelegates.
And Sanders couldn't catch her
before the primaries even began, and it almost became mathematically impossible for him to get the nomination. They were justifiably outraged.
But the way that plays out too, Chris, is that it hurts that candidate's and fundraising ability as well, because people think this is the candidate, Hillary Clinton is the candidate, so why should I waste my money on Bernie Sanders? But Chris Tritico, you alluded to the 1968 convention when the party establishment nominated Hubert Humphrey, who was a pro-war candidate, over two anti-war contenders, Eugene McCarthy and George McGovern. And I think the party now recognizes that insurgency that we call the progressives should have a say in this. And I think for the Democrats, they need to get this together, because look at what happened to the GOP and how that party with their insurgent candidate, where that party is now. So I think that there's some parallels.
I'll tell you my objection to the superdelegate system we have is the Democratic Party, since at least the 60s, has said that the Republicans in this country have been disenfranchising voters all over the South, the way that the elections are held.
The Democrats or the Republicans?
We have been saying that about the Republicans, the Democratic Party. And for us to have a nominating system that disenfranchises the people from being able to select their presidential nominee is disingenuous to the people. And we cannot keep that system in place.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So how can that play out in 2020 for us? I mean, we have a socialist wing of the party now.
Right, which I think is disastrous for the party, but we do.
And I've heard you say that a lot of times, and so that's why I bring up the question. So if we get a young
Socialist.
Young Socialist. I was going to try to say the name of the party, but I can't think of it right now.
Democratic Socialist of America.
Thank you. I'm glad. Against it, no more about it.
Know your enemies.
Who the mainline Democrats don't think can win, and then we've stripped the superdelegates of their power to override the vote, then we're going to have to live with that.
That's right.
I'm okay with that, but
you know what? You can't be a democracy, and you can't say you stand for something and then do the opposite. I can't stand for that, and I can't be in a party that stands for that.
The way the proposal reads, it would effectively eliminate the voting powers of superdelegates on the first ballot for the nomination. The party hasn't had a national convention go to a second ballot since 1952.
Right. The superdelegates are not going away. They just can't vote in the first ballot.
Yeah, but they aren't going away without a fight because they want this system that disenfranchises voters. And so this is not over yet. Even though the Bylaws and Rules Committee for the DNC agree with this proposal, you have people who are, state government and national Congress people and stuff who like that power. They're used to that power. They aren't going to let this
I understand,
go
but
without
it is so disingenuous to go and lecture a state.
What's interesting is the whole thing was put into place to stop a candidate like Trump, and was pointed out in one article so that you would have sort of this institutional barrier. But I think we've gotten to a point where folks are tired of seeing elections and the process of nominating. There are a hell of a lot of people who are upset about the Electoral College after the last race. And so this sort of harkens back to that. And I think the party will be idiots if they try to find some way to undo this, because we have to have the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. And a lot of those folks are very young. They're not beholden to the Democratic Party yet, and they could just easily say, well, screw this. So we'll go be independents, and both parties can fight.
So you're in favor of the change?
I'm definitely in favor of the
absolutely.
change. I think it's a step in the right direction.
I just don't know how anyone who is an elected official in the Democratic Party can go to Texas and Mississippi and Georgia and lecture those states about the way they hold elections and then support this system that disenfranchises the very voters that they're lecturing the states about. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it basically says we know better than you do.
Yeah.
Who
your
can
president
win and
will be.
who should be.
Right.
And if we don't go forward, this actually will be a good thing for Democrats. What we have with Democrats is a problem getting our voters out. And right now we've got a lot of enthusiasm, and anything that shows these young people who want change that we're going to continue to have a top-down system is going to discourage them.
But if you haven't noticed, a lot of politicians like to have their asses kissed. And one thing the super delegate system ensures is that anyone who wants to run for president has to come and kiss every congressperson's ass, because they want to sew up those votes as early as possible. So they do these little breakfast things, and this may have cut down on the number of kisses delivered to someone's butt cheeks.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Let me say this.
Go ahead.
One reason I've always said I would never run for office is because I could never kiss that much ass. So,
Have you ever tried?
No. So the politicians can get a little less ass kissing, and they can continue to kiss people's ass. And I think that if you get elected to a position and have a certain amount of power, you ought to be the one kissing ass. I'm sorry, I keep pointing at you, Chris Bell. And we shouldn't have to kiss your ass.
So I think the best thing about this, both Chris's and my sister, is that this sausage making process gets taken care of ahead of the convention, and you have a less messy process when you get in the room. And so I think this is a good thing.
All right, let's move on. Move over, men. The women are in the house. Andy's been yelling at us to do this story now for 3 or 4 weeks, and so we finally we're going to do it just for you.
Have Andy. I been screeching? Have I been a shrew?
This year, a record number of women have won primary spots on their ballot in their respective states. More of them will appear on the ballots for congressional and statewide executive offices than at any other time in our history. 2018, I counted up, I think, 122 women who have made it through their primaries onto the ballot nationwide. And I'm actually maybe wrong about that as I started looking back through my research. Donald Trump scoffed at the Women's March on Washington when it happened right after the election, if you'll recall. The march was the day after his inauguration. It had more participants than he did at his inauguration, which is why he scoffed at it. I remember Cokie Roberts on the air right after it, and she said they can turn this into something or they can let it die. If they want to turn it into something, women need to run for office, and this is the result.
Yes, and women are running for office, but interestingly...
But you won't, just because you'd have to kiss a little
I'm not. I'll write a check. But lots of Republican women in Congress are leaving or retiring. So as far on the Republican side, they may end up with fewer women than they have now. Good news is on the Democratic side, which is the side that we here at What's Left America care about. So I made myself some notes. 11 women are favored to win in November. 10 are Democrats, 1 is a Republican.
For Congress?
For Congress. This is all information regarding Congress. 41 are in competitive races. 34 of those are Democrats and 7 are Republicans. And and then we have quite a number who are not expected to win. But this is an unprecedented number of women who are running. And I do think that Trump is a catalyst for some of this.
I think that's no question about it.
In addition to Me Too and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I looked at some of the statistics, and there are a total of 229 women who have qualified for the November ballot, 167 Democrats, 50 Republicans, 8 independents, 3 libertarians, and 1 Green Party candidate. But the thing that stuck out to me was that was
that on the primary or is that on the general election?
That was primary.
Okay.
Yeah, and so one of the things that stood out to me is that there are Republican women running in House District rated as solid Democratic by CNN polling, then running in solid Republican districts. And I think the fact that you have some really attractive Democratic women candidates bodes well for the party because people are looking to elect these women to Congress to go up there and make a change. And I think, as Andrea pointed out, Donald Trump has been a catalyst for this because of the way he views women.
Well, I don't think there's any question
to the way he views women, the people who are more than willing to get on board with that.
Well, I don't think there's any question that it'll bring a major change to D.C. And I've always loved this story. I was working on a case, and there were these 2 lawyers from Alabama that I was working with, and one was a little bit older, and one was a little bit younger, and the younger guy was getting ready to get married. And we were at lunch, and the older guy from Alabama said, well, I want to give you some free advice. He said, when my wife and I got married, we decided, since I was the major breadwinner, that I would make all the big decisions and she would make all the little decisions. And she said, we've been married 10 years now, and we haven't had to make a single big decision. And it just goes to show that men have been relying on women to make so many decisions for so many years, and it's not going to be any different when they have more in the halls of Congress.
You know what the difference is going to be?
And we need their insight.
Back when what's her name? John Adams' wife, Abigail. Adams said, please don't forget the women. There have always been those sort of jokes about, big decisions, little decisions my wife makes. I make all the decisions as long as my wife approves, whatever, blah, 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 blah. They're funny, and there's a truth to them, but the difference is going to be now that women are going to be making decisions from a position of power. They're not going to be tricking men into doing what they want. They're not going to be, convincing men to do what they want. They're going to be doing what they want because it's what women want. Let me say also, just because a woman is in a position of power doesn't mean she's going to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
But it is still, even when women do the wrong thing, from our point of view, or they need a seat at the table, as do people of color, as do,
Yeah,
Andy,
but I think you make a good point about women don't always vote there in their own self-interest.
Well, that was not the point I was making.
Well,
but
well.
They
you
might
can look
not
at
vote the
some
way
women-
I think they should vote,
Yeah.
but they still need to be at the table.
Well, there's some women in the GOP that
Well,
clearly
wow.
don't vote.
Well, I think-
Right.
the interests of women.
women.
But I think one of the most important thing of this election is there are 12 women on the ballot for state gubernatorial races, and I think a lot of stuff goes on at the state level that's important. 9 of those women are Democrat, 3 of them are Republicans, and
I
so
thought it was 10 and 1, but
well. I grew up with 4 sisters and a mother, so I'm used to compromise.
I think the positive thing is that most of these candidates are coming from the Democratic side. I'll be very honest with you. If they were just women candidates and didn't share my political views, I wouldn't be very excited at all. I think they have to be graded in a like fashion.
There's
Agreed.
one congressional candidate in Florida, a woman from Florida running in the GOP, who said that she was abducted by aliens, but that does not define her. And I posted on my
Well, it's
Facebook.
certainly going to lock up the alien vote.
Posted on my Facebook page. It may not define you, but it does define your mental health status. And it is lacking. Welcome to the GOP.
well, I always like when a politician tells the truth. Know where they stand. Yeah.
There's several transgender people on the ballot this time, which I think is a first in the country. That anyone has actually made it through the primary as a transgendered candidate. And at least 2 of them have noted that they've had so many death threats that they've had to get round-the-clock security, which is a sad thing for them. But I think it's a positive thing for the country that people are voting for them without regard for their. I was trying to figure out the right word there. Without regard for their status.
Well, that just shows how party politics have evolved. I remember not long ago. Was it the governor of Colorado who was gay and he had to resign?
Announce it and resign.
Yeah.
It's New Jersey, wasn't it?
New Jersey.
Yeah.
I think it was Jim McGarvey or something like
Yeah.
that. And it just shows how it's evolved in terms of that doesn't matter. What's your policy views? How can you move this agenda forward? And I think people are more enlightened, and so that's not a real issue anymore. And that's good because it gives people who have something to offer the public service the ability to run without worrying about people caring about what their agenda is.
Well, anger is a great motivating factor.
Right.
And when you become a target, like the transgender community has become for the GOP, naturally that's going to draw a lot of people out to want to get more involved in the process, and they should.
Right.
I think that'll bring a greater understanding.
Do you have something to say about the log cabin Republicans?
I don't understand them. Greg Abbott is a disabled person, and every now and then I think about him. He was a state district judge. He was on the Texas Supreme Court. And he just made his way up through to the governorship of Texas, and it's something that is just so it's not anything that anybody even talks about. Now, I think that he probably could do more for the disabled in Texas.
Or anything.
I disagree with almost everything that comes out of his mouth. And yet, I love the fact that here's a person, a paraplegic, in a wheelchair, and nobody cares. It doesn't make any difference. It's not disqualifying. And I would like to see that same sort of acceptance amongst all Americans for whatever differences we may hold.
I totally agree with that, 100%. I wish that Greg Abbott, when he was on the Texas Supreme Court, had have not issued rulings ensuring that no one else could get the $6 million out of a lawsuit that he got out of his lawsuit when he was disabled.
Well,
but that's a different topic.
We'll
take that up some other day.
When hypocrites are on the ballot.
If they don't allow hypocrites on the ballot,
nobody can run. All right, let's move on. The emperor has no clothes. The president could be heard from the residence wing of the White House last week screaming, "What happened?" As Paul Manafort was convicted on 8 out of 10 counts, and Michael Cohen pled guilty while tying Trump directly to campaign finance violations, and tied him right into a conspiracy to commit those campaign violations. And then the next day, Alan Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump Organization, executive vice president of the Trump Organization, it was announced that he has been granted immunity and is working with Robert Mueller on the investigation. And if that's not good enough, David Pecker, the man with the most unfortunate last name in America, the CEO of the National Enquirer, cut an immunity deal with the Mueller team, and he is working with them, and he is reported to have a safe full of evidence of many catch and kill deals that he has done for Trump over the last several years. The emperor has now no clothes.
So my most favorite response in this whole story was when they reached out to Karen McDougal, the playmate who accused Donald Trump of having an affair with her. They reached out for comment, and the comment was, "We told you so." So it doesn't get any better than that. And I think what's happened is he is being exposed. He's being pressed for his lies. And now we have the evidence because his closest allies are turning on him and they're flipping. And that should have the president real worried.
Well, it clearly does. It clearly does.
Well, I tell you what my concern about this is. Omarosa was last week. We forgot about her. We moved on. But a week before that, it was somebody else. And what's to say we're not going to just, we're shocked in the moment, and then something else happens next week, and we're shocked again, and then we forgot what happened. But here's the thing. Let's just take the whole Omarosa says that Trump is a racist, and I have the proof. Really? Do we need to hear him say the N-word on tape to know Donald Trump is a racist? We knew he was a racist when those other people voted for him.
Yeah.
And hearing a tape, I don't think that is necessarily going to cause his base to facepalm and go, "Oh my God,
They don't care.
I didn't believe it,
Yeah.
but now I have no choice but to believe it." We knew he made payoffs to women. We knew he was a grifter. We knew all these things about him. We know these things about him. The proof, does it really matter?
No,
but don't
because
you find it kind of amazing that all of the focus is on the criminal aspect of this? Nobody's. It's amazing that this guy is surviving in politics, because that's all we're talking about. Well, whether it rose to the level of breaking the law. Can
he be impeached?
Just breaking civil norms in society? And then you look at the evangelical community.
Where are they? Right.
Why are they speaking up?
Him. They're right. They're the wing
because
beneath
he
his
was
wings.
apparently sleeping with this woman. Was it days before, or days after his son was born?
Right.
But they don't want to talk about any of that. It really is, when now it's basically been proven by Michael Cohen coming out and pleading guilty and said he'd pay her off.
Right.
I mean,
but I think Andrea makes a good point about why all this doesn't matter to Trump base and even to some, Republicans and Democrats. As James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid. And as long as the economy is doing well, and I hear this from all stations, and so as long as everything is going well, my 401k is doing great, none of this matters. This reminds me of the Ken Starr investigation, where it started out as Whitewater. Mueller's investigation started out as looking into Russians and
wait a minute, it's completely different.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying, I'm trying to make a parallel between how the investigation morphs into he's looking now at Trump's finances.
But Mueller's not doing that. What Mueller's doing is following his charge, because when he finds something that's outside of his...
He references to the Southern District of New York.
Right, but what Ken Starr did was every time he found something new, he went back and said, give me the power to do this. And Ken Starr grew and grew and grew. Robert Mueller is saying, this is outside of my bailiwick, Southern District of New York, you prosecute this.
Yes.
It's two different things, and Robert Mueller is the only one in this whole damn thing with integrity.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with that, and that's the way it should go. But the whole point, Trump can keep saying, I did nothing wrong, because there's been no indictments except for the Russian spies in
Yeah.
but they
Listen
still
to what you just
but
said.
they
Yeah,
still
yeah, no,
they
I
still
get it.
haven't touched Trump.
They haven't touched
That's
him.
the
will.
point.
That's-
and the Democrats are now talking about running on impeachment. We're going to discuss
better
that
not.
later.
They better not.
But-
His son is
but
getting
they-
indicted any day now.
But they
I mean,
haven't touched him in
Listen,
this investigation.
listen.
That's why Sarah Sanders can go out and say with conviction.
Do you know how long
conviction? He's done nothing
I do
wrong.
this for a living. Do you know how long federal investigations generally take? 4 or 5 years. All right. Robert Mueller is doing exactly what he's supposed to do, and they don't talk to you during a federal investigation.
Well,
they come in one day and they arrest you.
You know what? I love this. Well, I just, you guys know about this already, I'm sure, but I just learned what a talking indictment is, where he puts so much information in the indictment. Like if you go back and read the indictment of these Russian hackers, he lays out the entire case with saying everything but the, words Donald Trump, so that you could put it together. And on this day, Grucifer did this the same day that Donald Trump said, I bet, there's going to be some really interesting stuff happening in the DNC.
Conspiracy. That's a conspiracy. They have to lay it out.
Okay, but I want to say, you're right. There's a parallel here, and you're right. It's different. But the parallel, James Campbell, as I see it, I'm pointing. Nobody can see where I'm pointing. James Campbell, the way I see it is that this, knowing that if Michael Cohen committed a crime on behalf of, at the direction of the candidate, Donald Trump, the candidate also committed a crime. It's just not satisfying. It's not satisfying to the public. Just the way people just the way Democrats argued, I don't care if he got a blowjob in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
And they wanted Ken Starr to go away. The electorate for Trump doesn't care about he had an extramarital affair. We don't care. What we need is a smoking gun of treason.
I've just brought that up because I think the evangelical community should be held accountable.
I do
And they
too.
should care.
They
care.
definitely should care, based on
You
how
can't-
they've lectured everyone about how they should lead their lives for years, and
Yeah.
then they watch this piece of shit act this way
Don't-
from the White House,
don't-
and they say nothing. And I
Don't
think
stand in the pulpit every week and tell me how to live my life and then support this guy. Don't do it.
And we keep talking about the base. Well, the base is never going to leave him. And one of the most interesting things I heard this week is that Nixon, after he resigned, still had 25% support in the United States. And so the base is going to hold, but as long as his base is only about 35%, he's also going to lose.
But Nixon resigned. Trump is not going to resign.
Let's talk about...
But I want you to answer something
Okay.
for me, Mr. Lawyer.
All right.
I want you to answer for me. Why can't the Democrats go out and talk about impeachment?
All right, I'm going to answer that.
Jobs, Social Security, protecting Medicare, protecting the climate. Why can't they
I'll tell you why.
and chew gum?
I'll tell you why they shouldn't be talking about impeachment. And I agree with Nancy Pelosi and the others that say we should not run on impeachment, because if you can count to 60, you know why you should not be talking about impeachment, because they cannot remove him. There's been 2 instances in our lifetime where impeachment occurred or was about to occur: Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton. In both times, and Richard Nixon resigned because he could count to 60. Bill Clinton did not resign because he could count to 60. Hang on. And both times, Richard Nixon knew that he was going to lose his impeachment trial. Bill Clinton could count to 60 and said, you can't remove me, so go ahead and impeach me. And they did it, and he won, and he left office with almost a 70% approval rating. Donald Trump, as the Senate currently sits, cannot be removed from office. So impeaching him is stupid.
Okay,
What
please.
is that saying about if somebody's beating up your opponent, don't just let it happen? whatever. Nobody can think of it. Okay.
If someone's digging themselves a hole, don't take away the shovel.
Yeah.
Don't take the shovel out of their hand.
So
and that
run
is
on-
basically what's happening.
but
Everyone's
running on
talking
impeachment-
about impeachment. Why the Democrats, if they talk about it, it actually undermines it. It
Yeah.
makes it makes it an issue. The Democrats need to be talking about all of those things that you just mentioned, not impeachment.
Exactly.
Let's let it be an issue that the people are talking
now
about.
you have Donald Trump talking about it. Let him talk about it.
Donald Trump talk about it.
So back to my point. I think you can walk and chew gum. I don't think you need to make it a central issue.
But we can also be smart about it. We can be. Let's have a. Let's have a,
I'm not saying not be tactical.
Let
about
me
it.
share
What I'm
two
s-
words with you that also should demonstrate why we shouldn't be talking about impeachment. President Pence.
Vox had a good story. I'm going to put a link to it in our show notes about how there's some evidence that Pence must have known everything, and so if Trump goes down, Pence goes down. Or maybe that's just my wet dream. I don't know. But if I can find the article, I will. I'll link to it in our show notes.
You mean okay?
Okay, my God, that got everybody off track. Focus.
Do you think Pence wakes up every morning thinking,
With a wet
this is
dream?
what I got into? I accepted this job. I could have said no.
He's the devil. He's happy.
I could have said no.
He's happy. He's the worst.
The Republicans one day are going to have to live with what they've done here. I mean, and I'm not talking about the voters. I'm talking about the Congress, with the way they have allowed this to go on. Lindsey Graham, there's a great speech of him on the floor of the Senate arguing for the removal of Bill Clinton over the crap that he was impeached for. And if you look at what Bill Clinton was impeached for compared with today, with what's going on in the removal trial. If you didn't watch that, go back and look at it and watch that removal trial and watch Lindsey Graham arguing for the removal of Bill Clinton. And his silence today is stunning.
But it goes both ways, and you can also listen to Jerry Nadler arguing why Bill Clinton shouldn't have been impeached. So, no one has the cleanest hands.
And I say we do. The Democrats have no business filing articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. If they can't win a removal trial, don't do it. And I think impeachment is a horrible idea. I think it hurts the party in the long run. I think you let this thing play itself out. You attack him for what he's doing and let the people get angrier and angrier and angrier, and he's going to lose the next election, and you play it out that way. I think impeachment is a bad move.
Let me add in a caveat and see what you say then, Mr. Lawyer. If they win the Senate in November, would you have a different conversation?
Only if there's 60 votes.
Okay. So that's my caveat.
Then I would reevaluate it.
And the House.
If the
and
Democrats
the House.
win.
Yeah.
The Democrats would have to have 60 votes in the Senate.
But the House, where I understand it, would have to write the articles of
the House has to
impeachment.
pass the articles of impeachment, but there has to be 60 votes in the Senate for the removal trial. And if you can't get the removal, there's no sense in doing the impeachment.
I got it.
There's no sense in taking the country through it.
But that's my caveat.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
we'll revisit this later on
after the election.
Yeah.
But I probably won't change my mind. I don't
Okay.
think it's a good move. I think it's a bad move for the
Okay.
Democrats and a bad move for the country
right.
to go through that again. All right, let's move on. I'm tired of talking about him.
It's required.
It's part of the job. All right. Yesterday, sadly, John McCain died. So our last segment today is goodbye, John McCain. McCain was a true hero. He volunteered to fly fighter jets in Vietnam, even though he didn't have to. His father was an admiral. His grandfather was an admiral. He could have stayed right here in the United States and worked here in the military and never left the country. But he volunteered to fly in Vietnam, a fighter jet, and was shot down over Hanoi. Spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. While he was there as a POW, after 2 years, they found out who he was, offered to send him home. He said, "No, I'll stay here. I'll go home when the people who were here captured before me go home." And he stayed. That's a hero. His career as a fighter pilot was over after that because of his injuries that left him in pain for the rest of his life. He couldn't lift his arms above his shoulders. He spent the next 40 years as a politician from Arizona. His life was built around service, and his He spent every day filing bill. Every bill he filed was filled with sponsors from the Democratic Party. That's what his life was about.
Well, what I tweeted last night sort of goes along with what we were talking about earlier regarding President Trump. I wrote, so sad that one person who has stood so tall during this national nightmare and who would have been able to live with himself with great pride would now have to leave us. Rest in peace. And obviously, I mean, live with himself with great pride after the national nightmare is over, because he was one who would stand up and was willing to hold the idiot president accountable for his actions and was willing to speak out against him. And I think that sort of was in sync with his entire career. Obviously, I did not support John McCain when he ran against Barack Obama, but I respected him. And I think that's how a lot of Democrats felt, because he was part of that old school way of thinking that you didn't have to vilify the other side. And I also saw him as such a human being. He made mistakes. He was, part of the Keating aid, or however the folks that got in trouble, and he admitted it. He admitted it was a mistake, how much influence he had allowed that individual to have in his life, and he came away and answered that with helping to pass campaign finance reform, the McCain-Feingold bill. And, he admitted that it was a mistake to put Sarah Palin on the ballot. And I think that was pretty bold as well, knowing that he would invite the wrath of the Tea Party with whom she was so popular. So I think he was a man that we can all learn a few things from, and I agree with your characterization of him as a hero. He really was.
I think one of the things about John McCain that a lot of people overlook is his talking to the GOP about climate change and getting them past the point of denying it. He introduced market-based solutions. He was in favor of cap and trade to try to do something about climate change. And you don't have those kinds of people who speak up with a voice of conviction about we really do have an issue with global warming and climate change, and talking to his Republican colleagues about what we can do to change this with a market focus. But those kind of conversations aren't going on anymore, and that's going to be missed because you have someone now who's completely, rewriting the EPA, and you don't have anybody in the Republican Party speaking up with conviction saying this is wrong. But John McCain needs to step out of the Republican Party right now and be that voice for what's going on with climate change. And I think a lot of people don't remember that voice that he raised around that issue.
Beto O'Rourke was at a rally and got a question about, what was it?
Kneeling
at football, yes.
NFL.
At the NFL. And he made the most eloquent speech, saying that kneeling is a First Amendment right, and it is the hallmark of being American is to be able to speak your mind. And that reminded me of John McCain when he was at I don't know if it was during one of the debates or if he was just talking to a crowd of supporters, and one woman got up and said that she couldn't trust Barack Obama because he's an Arab. And John McCain shook his head and said, "No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, a citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues." And that's what this campaign is all about. And I've got to tell you, my respect level for John McCain, I always have had a decent level of respect for him, because anyone who can be a POW and go through the hell that he went through, but for him to say that in a campaign that was ugly, to say the least, was it was a wonderful thing, and it took a good person of high character to say that.
His relationship with the president was toxic, to say the least. The president refused to even say his name the other day when he signed the defense bill that was named after him. This morning, the president tweeted after it was announced that John McCain died. The president tweeted, "My deepest sympathies and respect go out to the family of Senator John McCain. Our hearts and prayers are with you." The most presidential thing the man's done since he became president. I don't know who wrote it, but at least it was tweeted out on the president's Twitter account.
And I think Charles Schumer made has proposed to rename the Senate building.
It's one of the Senate office buildings.
In the name of John McCain.
And it should be done.
And replacing the name of Russell. I can't talk today for some reason. Well, that may be all the time, but
I was going to say you get points for consistency.
Thank you, Chris Bell. But he wants to replace the name of Russell Richards, who was an ally of LBJ, but he was a Democrat, but voted against the Civil Rights Act, and so John McCain, I think, as a principled person, would have voted for the Civil Rights Act, and I think that's a good move by Schumer to propose that.
Presidents Obama and Bush are going to deliver the eulogies. President Trump is disinvited from his funeral, but they did invite the vice president, and I think that's. That shows the level of toxicity between John McCain and the president over the last couple of years.
What would Trump supporters say about that?
I don't think John McCain cared, quite frankly. I mean, at the level that relationship had digressed to, I don't think he cared. This is my family, and this is the way it's going to be, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
At this point in this juncture.
Yeah.
I think that's the way it has to be.
Yeah.
Before we close this out, I want to make a correction. It takes 67 votes in the Senate to convict, not 60. That's what we said. We said 60, but it's 67.
Chris can't count to 67. He can only count to 60.
That's right. That's right. Did you look that up?
I knew it, but before I said it, I wanted to make sure.
Okay. So, well, thanks for correcting me on the air. I appreciate that.
Well, how else are people going to know?
That's wonderful.
You're a big man. You can take it.
All right. So with that correction, let's
and it's Richard Russell.
Yeah.
That also.
With those two
Richard
corrections
Russell.
on the air, let's move on to out of left field. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think I have the perfect out of left field given our discussion today, and I just got it this morning. It was emailed to me, and it says it's called The Haircut. I think I've heard it before, but it's worth another read. Blessed are those that can give without remembering and take without forgetting. One day a florist went to a barber for a haircut. After the cut, he asked about his bill, and the barber replied, "I cannot accept money from you. I'm doing community service this week." The florist was pleased and left the shop. When the barber went to open his shop the next morning, there was a thank you card and a dozen roses waiting for him at his door. Later, a police officer comes in for a haircut, and when he tries to pay his bill, the barber again replied, "I cannot accept money from you. I'm doing community service this week." The police officer was happy and then left the shop. The next morning, when the barber went to open up, there was a thank you card and a dozen donuts waiting for him at his door. Then a congressman came in for a haircut, and when he went to pay his bill, the barber again replied, "I cannot accept money from you. I'm doing community service this week." The congressman was very happy and left the shop. The next morning, when the barber went to open up, there were a dozen congressmen lined up waiting for a free haircut. And that, my friends, illustrates the fundamental difference between the citizens of our country and the politicians who run it.
Okay, I'll go next. I thought about saying this, talking about Georgia polling places, Republicans trying to close 5 out of 7 polling places in predominantly black areas in Georgia, but that got shut down, so I got to say that anyway. But my out of left field is about a woman running for Congress named MJ Hagar. She wanted to be a pilot when she grew up, and she said she's had to push down doors her whole life, and she fought and she made her way through pilot training, and she went to the Air Force, and she got a Purple Heart. She afterwards, because of an injury, she could not go back to her job as a pilot, and so she wanted to go into a combat unit, but she was told she couldn't. So she said, "Well, that's not right," and she couldn't because she was a woman. And she said, "That's not right," and she went to her congressperson, and he basically told her, "Well, you're not a donor of mine," and wouldn't give her a meeting. And she said, "Well, that's not right," and she decided to run against him. And MJ Hagar of Round Rock, Texas, which is right outside of Austin, is running, in fact, as a Democrat against John Carter, who is a Tea Party Republican, and best of luck, MJ Hagar.
So, we've been hearing about fake news and how that phrase has started to resonate in the country. And it's a real shame for people who work in the news business to hear that, and how reasonable people, believe that what they do is fake news. So this week we hear the president talking about flipping, and how Paul Manafort is a stand-up guy because he didn't flip, but Michael Cohen flipped. When I started my career, I was a police reporter, and there were many unsolved crimes in minority communities because nobody stepped up. Nobody stepped up to talk about who did the crime, even though they may know who the suspect was. So now the president is saying it's okay if you don't flip. Be a stand-up guy. That is not the message that kids in a minority community or anywhere should hear. If you know about a crime, step up and don't worry about the president saying don't flip.
I'm going to follow that up with kind of the similar message. I've spent my entire professional career when I talk to kids in high school or college or wherever, talking about values and integrity and honesty and professionalism. And the life of Senator John McCain really takes that home. When you look at his life and the way he lived his professional career, he embodied those values that are so important to us. And he said it best when he lost the last presidential race. He said, "I will not take the low road to the highest office in the land. I want the presidency in the best way, not the worst way." And that symbolizes really what America is all about, and professionalism and integrity. And I said today when I posted on my social media pages that when we look for heroes and when we look for an example of integrity and professionalism, we should look to the life of John McCain and use that as an example and a standard bearer for what we need in our country. And James, you were right. Our president should not be propping up those who violate the law. He should be propping up those like John McCain who honor everything our country was built upon. And so God bless you, John McCain. That's all the time we have today. We'll be back next week. Be sure and download us on iTunes, like us on iTunes, and I've screwed the whole thing up. Subscribe to us. I messed the whole thing up. Subscribe to us, download us on iTunes, and give us a like, and we'll see you next week.